So the question is about the technique delayed sword. I teach this technique as a defense against a right step-through punch. I know that's a very traditional way to teach this technique. I do it for a lot of reasons that have to do with the way I do everything. I'm a traditionalist. But I don't teach it initially against a grab. I know a lot of other schools do. That's fine. We have that conversation too. The way I have my system set up, I start with basic grabs, then we get to pushes, then we get to punches, and this is the first punch. Delayed sword. Step back, block, chop. You get it. It's a lead side counter. Whether you do it against the grab and you do it more as the jiu-jitsu version, where it's a manipulation, and there's a lot of different manipulations there, or you do it as the striking version, which is what I start with, it's the same inside technique. The point is, we're getting some kind of stimulus and energy from here. So we go back to an open face and hit. I'm sorry, I said open face. We end up in a closed face position. But he's coming through with something from that side. Step back, hard block, soft block, half downward block. You're going to use this arm to engage that limb, like this. This is going to protect you in some way. Then you're going to lash out with your leg and do something. Finish him, right? So all these things are delayed sword. It doesn't matter. Like, yeah, sure. That's delayed sword. But when I teach it to a student the first time, we start with a punch that's way back here and is going to move all the way through the frame. And I have them step back and block, and we have a conversation about position checks. These are brand new students. They're learning this technique in their first month and a half of training with me. So, I mean, we still have a lot of beginner conversations to have, like what's a block, what's a check, front kick. Obviously this is a beginner technique. Front kick, jab, I mean, come on. So whether we're doing the control version or the striking version, I started with some different controls. So by the time I get here, we're talking about range and marriage of gravity and timing, and we're starting to learn about punches, right? That's what I use this technique for. At the end of the day, what are you using the technique for? You can teach any technique you want. What are you teaching? Why are you teaching it? That's the conversation we're supposed to be having, right? So delayed sword. Step back, block, kick the guy in the groin. Honestly, I've changed most of my groin strikes to the hip or the bladder. But yeah, sure, kick him in the groin. We're talking about basic self-defense, right? I mean, basic self-defense, major targets, stun and run. Like, yeah. He does anything, get your hands up, kick him in the groin, and aim at his head. And then run, right? So again, we're a month and a half into their training when they learn this the first time. We're still having conversations like startle reflex, right? So, there's something coming. Get your hands up, right? And yeah, it's a hard block. Again, I teach it as the strike. But sure, when we have the grab conversation, it's all the manipulations and arm controls. And at some point, there's wrist locks. But I'm not going to teach these guys wrist locks the first time I teach them delayed sword. You know, that's just the way I do it. That's why we're having a striking conversation right now, right? We'll get to that when we get to that. So, again, this is like the 6th technique I teach, right? And the first couple were one arm, strike, like these kinds of basic, you know, step back, step in, like that's a technique before we get here. So again, like, we're dealing with beginners. That's the point. I mean, black belts can do stuff all day long. You know, you've been doing this for 15 years, everything's delayed sword. But if we're talking about the first time I teach a technique, that's what an embryonic phase is for. Because I have a student who's been in 8 classes, walked off the street, has no experience with violence whatsoever, and I'm going to be like, wrist lock, control, knee, strike, manipulate, throw to the ground, stomp on the head. Like, yeah, we could do that, but I've had people leave because I said, lay down on the floor, and they were like, ah, and, you know, now I lost a student. So to some degree, you have to, you know, bide your time. But that's the point of a technique like delayed sword. It's so simple. It's step back. It's lead side counter. Like, it's the first time we've had a conversation about striking with the lead side of the body. You know, we did it here, and now we're kind of doing the same thing. What do you know? Sword and hammer. Delayed hand. You know, like, it's the same technique. The only difference is this and this. Like, white belt material, you know? That's my point. Like, okay, yeah, all that stuff is awesome, and it is all in there. And yeah, when we're having a real self-defense conversation, it's not just, you know, let me fix the creases in your lapel. It's like I said, I do it as a punch. You know, so you're saying, oh, there's a follow-up punch. I start with a punch. But whatever, it doesn't matter what you're doing. The point isn't that you make them masters overnight. The point is to get them to say, like, here's a punch. That's why the first punch technique I teach is a step-through punch from way back here. Because I'm not going to square two people off that early in their training and be like, take that guy out, you know, and it's like, come on. Like, everybody starts with big circles, you know? Like, you have to put this in the context of the student. That's the point. But yeah, I mean, you can have people do all kinds of crazy, cool stuff right off the bat. My argument would be make the basics crazy, cool stuff. So, like, you know, you can't make that an awesome, effective technique against a wide variety of attacks. You tell me, oh, that doesn't work against a boxer's jab. It's a lead side counter. It's the closest weapons with straight jabs to the opponent. Like, that's a basic... And then, of course, yeah, the advanced student knows inside manipulations, and they know, you know, this half of the circle, and then we're going to learn that half of the circle, and then we're going to learn the outside of the circle, and then we're going to put it together. Like, okay, that's Kempo, right? Like, that's what we do. But the question isn't like, is this a stupid technique? The question is, why are you doing that technique? What value are you getting out of it? You know, how are you training it? Are you just robot man all the time against a single attack? Well, you know it'll always work against that attack. If you want to know if it work against other attacks, you had practice it. And I don't mean other attacks like, okay, now it's a spear. I guess delayed sword would work in spear. Honestly, I can't think of a technique delayed sword wouldn't work against. Like, it's not like we're talking about prancing tiger here, right? It's delayed sword. This is what kills me. What? It's always this conversation like, this technique doesn't work. This technique doesn't work. We didn't have, like, the circling windmills discussion. We're talking about delayed sword now. Like, everything works. Get to work. Like, that's the point, right? Show up to class. Do delayed sword. Don't talk about how yours is better or mine is worse. Do it. And then it works, right? That's how karate works. So, delayed sword. Let's say it's the step-through punch. The timing's pretty obvious. You're going to see that coming from a mile away. It's a huge, obvious strike. The flip side of that is, I'll tell you what, if I came back like this and stepped through and hit you, that's a finishing move. So you have to understand that too. Like, yeah, this is stupid. Nobody would do this. Well, not as their first strike. But if their first strike is while you're doing the chest bump thing, and they bump you out of range, and then they step through and punch, boom. You didn't get a chance to defend yourself because the fight's already over. So that's why the previous techniques were push techniques. Oh, I'm getting pushed. What do I do? I'm getting pushed. What do I do? Now I'm getting pushed. In comes the punch. What do I do? Well, you're going to do that or you're going to do that. Like, you're going to block it to get it off the line of you, and you're either going to counter with the front of your body or the back of your body. So that's why you learn those techniques at that level. And there's a lot more complex techniques as you go through the system, and everybody knows that. That's not the point. When somebody's only had 3 weeks of training, 4 weeks of training, 6 techniques, and those techniques are, this kind of basic stuff, and now we've got the arms in play, that's why delayed sword is the way it is. Now, if all you ever do for the rest of your life is this, that's okay. You're doing something else, right? If all you ever do for the rest of your life is this, that's okay too, right? Whatever. But if you want to be able to be effective with that material against actual resistance in a real fight, then those are the sorts of situations you have to simulate in your training. So, I'd be happy to discuss any of these techniques. Let me know. I love it. I love having a conversation. I love doing karate. If you're ever in town, hit me up. You guys all know that. So, I'll talk to you soon.